I'm Michael Martinez, and you're about to listen to an AI-generated discussion of my article, Where Do Hobbits Come From? This article shares details you're unlikely to hear from other sources, including the pre-Tolkien origin of the word hobbit, as well as a few details J.R.R. Tolkien shared about the ancient prehistorical origins of hobbits in Middle-earth. You'll notice the AI host mispronounced a few words. You may also notice, when you read my article, that the AI drew upon some other unspecified sources to fill out the discussion.
There's just something endlessly captivating about hobbits.
Oh, absolutely.
These small, sort of unassuming folk who somehow find themselves right at the heart of these huge adventures in Middle-earth.
Yeah, against all odds, really.
And one question that I find myself constantly drawn back to, and I know many of you listening are as well, is just where exactly did they come from?
It's a great question.
So today, we're taking a deep dive using a really interesting article one of you shared with us. It's Michael Martinez's Where Do Hobbits Come from his Middle-earth and J.R.R. Tolkien blog.
Here.
And our mission really is to explore the clues it offers to this enduring mystery.
And it's worth mentioning, Martinez has written quite a bit on Hobbit prehistory elsewhere, too. So this perspective is definitely coming from someone who's thought about it a lot.
Exactly. He's really dug into it.
What's fascinating right from the get-go is that while Tolkien, he intentionally left the precise origins of hobbits a bit hazy, didn't he?
He did, yeah. Almost like they just appeared.
Right, like they just sort of wandered onto the stage. But the information we do have, like in this article, it lets us piece together some pretty compelling theories.
So we're not aiming for, like, definitive answers where Tolkien was deliberately ambiguous.
No, not at all. The goal is more to synthesize the key insights from this particular piece. Highlight the most intriguing bits about their beginnings for you.
Yeah.
Without getting totally bogged down in every single detail.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because it becomes clear pretty quickly that when we ask where do hobbits come from, we're actually hitting that question from two different angles, aren't we?
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, two angles.
First, you've got the in-story origin, like how the race of hobbits actually emerged within Middle-earth, their place in Tolkien's bigger mythology, especially thinking about the Silmarillion. And then there's the other side. The extra story origin, the real world stuff, the inspirations, Tolkien's own creative process that led to the idea, even the name Hobbit.
That's a perfect framing. And when you look at their place in Middle-earth, it's really striking, as the article points out, that they aren't actually mentioned in the Silmarillion at all.
Right, which sort of suggests they become important, later on in the timeline.
Exactly. But then flip over to that extra story side, the etymology.
Yeah.
The origin of the word hobbit. Now that reveals some really surprising connections and possibilities.
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets really interesting for me. The article points out that the earliest recorded use of the word hobbit, get this, pops up, way back in the mid-1800s.
Surprisingly early, isn't it?
It is. It's in this list of names for fairy creatures, things linked to Halloween, put together by a guy named Michael Denham.
Right.
And the list includes all sorts of hob creatures.
Yeah.
Hobgoblins, hobbelords, even hobheadlesses.
Hobheadlesses. Wow. That's quite a collection. Sounds like some proper spooky folklore. But what's really intriguing here is understanding that hob root word itself. The article references the online etymology dictionary, which is a fantastic resource, by the way, if you ever want to trace word histories.
Oh, it's great.
And it suggests hob is likely a shortened version of hobby, which was a common nickname for Rob, short for Robin. Think Robin Goodfellow, that kind of thing.
Ah, okay. Like how you get Hick for Richard or Hodge for Roger.
Exactly like that.
Huh.
So there's this sort of familiar, almost common folk feel baked into the prefix itself.
Right. Starts off down to earth, almost an everyday kind of nickname. But then there's another layer, isn't there? The article says hob specifically got linked with meaning elf way back in the 1500s.
Yes. So anything starting with hob back then was often understood to be an elf or, some kind of elf-like creature.
An elf creature.
Precisely. The article gives a great example. Hob lanthorn, which apparently meant elf lantern.
Elf lantern. What would that be?
Well, it likely referred to those mysterious ghostly lights you sometimes hear about, will-o'-the-wisps, maybe? Sometimes called corpse candles. A phenomena that, some people today might even try to explain as modern orbs.
Huh. Wild.
So this historical link, this connection between Hob and the world of elves, it's pretty suggestive when you think about Tolkien's creations later on.
And it's fascinating that even though apparently we don't have solid proof Tolkien ever read Denham's List.
Right, no direct link found.
He seemed hesitant to claim he'd completely invented the word hobbit. It's like he maybe sensed it had older roots, you know?
Perhaps, yeah. It feels plausible for someone so attuned to language.
Then bam, we get his own first written use in 1925, scribbled on an exam paper, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit.
Just like that. Amazing how that one sentence started everything.
It really is. An entire universe sparked from that.
And as Tolkien then developed that story, the story of that hobbit, he initially wove in elements from his bigger Silmarillion mythology.
Right, I remember reading about that.
Only to later take many of those direct links out for the published version of The Hobbit. Which suggests, his own understanding of how hobbits fit into the older world was evolving.
Okay, but maybe one of the most fun possibilities raised here is this idea of a philological joke.
Yeah.
Like a wordplay based on the origins.
A linguistic wink, maybe?
Exactly. The idea that because of this hob to elf connection and those early rumors inside the Hobbit itself about hobbits marrying fairies.
Which the text dismisses, touching on that whole are there fairies in Middle-earth question.
So maybe Tolkien was having a little fun, subtly hinting, look, you might see them as just ordinary little guys, but even their name carries this whisper of something, maybe something a bit elven.
That's a really neat thought. Tolkien being a meticulous language scholar, these echoes probably weren't accidental, were they?
Doesn't feel like it.
It adds this extra layer of richness for anyone who wants to dig deeper, even if it's not obvious right on the surface. But okay, let's shift focus back to the in-story origin. As the article puts it, that picture becomes, significantly more obscure.
Yeah, much fuzzier. So if they weren't big players alongside the elves back in the First Age, when did they actually show up in the Middle-earth timeline?
Well, the article points us to Tolkien's later writings, stuff from the 1950s, after Lord of the Rings was published.
Okay.
And that's where he mentions hobbits were first encountered by men, specifically men friendly with the Eldar, the elves, early in the Third Age.
Ah, Third Age. And where's that info come from?
That specific detail is from an essay called Dwarves and Men, which was published posthumously. And crucially, there's a footnote in the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien.
Right, the letters are key for so much.
They are. And this footnote gives us the clearest statement we have. It establishes hobbits as a subgroup of men. Definitely men.
Okay, so not related to elves, not dwarves, not ents or anything else.
Yeah.
A branch of humankind.
Exactly. They're mannish.
So, okay, if they're a type of men, then logically, their distant ancestors must have woken up with all the other men back in Hildorien, right?
That would be the logical deduction, yes.
And then started migrating west sometime during the First or maybe the Second Age. It feels like a bit of an inference, though, doesn't it?
It is, partly because, as the article notes, hobbits are conspicuously absent from other essays Tolkien wrote around the same time as dwarves and men.
Oh, okay.
Which suggests maybe he hadn't fully worked out their earlier history, their connection to the elves and the Dundane, in his own mind at that point.
Right. The timeline was still maybe a bit fluid for him there.
Seems that way. And dwarves and men even implies hobbits weren't in the Vales of Anduin and the lands east of the mountains during the Second Age.
Oh, why is that?
Because it describes them as arriving there early in the Third Age, which suggests a long time before that where they were, somewhere else, their history not really recorded in the big events.
Off the map, so to speak.
Pretty much. Then, as we get into the late Third Age, that's when we see the hobbits split into those three groups we know. The Fallohides, the Harfoots, and the Stoors.
Right, the three kindreds. And the article gives some nice distinctions between them. The Fallohides, they're the ones friendlier with elves, often leaders.
Yes, and more comfortable in woods. There's even a hint of a possible connection, though it's just speculation, with the Sylvan elves of Greenwood, Mirkwood.
Interesting. And the Harfoots. They were the most common.
Most numerous, yes. And they were the ones known for digging those hillside burrows, the smiles. They also seemed more likely to trade with nearby men.
Okay. And the Stoors.
River folk, lived near rivers, were noted as being a bit larger, broader, and they got on particularly well with dwarves.
So for nearly 1,000 years, roughly, in the early Third Age, these different hobbit groups seem to have settled in the upper Vales of Anduin. That's north of Lothlorien, right?
That's the area, yes. And they were apparently on good terms with the Northmen living there, the ancestors of people like the Barronings and the Woodmen we meet later.
But then things changed. Something pushed them west.
That's right. The westward move, crossing the Misty Mountains into Eriador, seems to have been driven by Sauron setting up shop in Dol Guldur, in southern Mirkwood.
Ah, the shadow growing in the forest.
Exactly. That period also saw Easterlings moving into areas near Mirkwood, leading to conflict with Gondor. It just seems like the growing darkness and trouble in the east made the hobbits look for quieter, safer lands further west.
Which eventually led them to the Shire.
Eventually, yes.
And that kind of brings us to the limit of what this article tells us about their actual origins, doesn't it? It reinforces that there isn't really a clear earlier history laid out here.
It really does. And it leaves us with this whole list of fascinating, unanswered questions. The article even lists some. When did the three groups actually split? Were they created by Yavanna, like Ollie made the dwarves?
Ooh, that's a big one. Who did create them?
Right. Where were they in the first age? Did they live near the Anduin earlier on? When exactly did they first settle in the Vales? Did they have tribes before the kindreds?
And what about those mentions of them riding in carts? Just so many little threads left dangling.
It really highlights the depth of Tolkien's world building, doesn't it? Even for people who might seem, relatively minor in the grand scheme, there's this implied rich history, even if it's kept a bit veiled.
Yeah.
Plenty for us to speculate about.
Absolutely. So, okay, to kind of wrap up our deep dive today, we've really looked at those two sides of the coin for where do hobbits come from. We explored that theoretical etymology of the word hobbit, with those surprising potential links back to elf through the hob root, maybe even a little linguistic joke from Tolkien himself.
Possibly.
And then we looked at their in-story emergence, popping up really in the early Third Age as this distinct branch of men settling in the Vales of Anduin, and then that westward journey that brought them towards the Shire.
And what's so fascinating is how Tolkien blends those, real-world linguistic ideas with this detailed, if somewhat hidden, fictional history. It just shows his incredibly layered approach to building his world. So believable, so enduring.
It really does. And it makes you think, doesn't it? Why did Tolkien choose to keep their ultimate origins a bit mysterious, a bit shrouded?
Yeah, what's the effect of that ambiguity?
Exactly. Could it be that their very sort of ordinariness, the fact they don't have this grand mythic origin story like the elves or even the dwarves, is that actually part of their charm? Part of what makes them so relatable?
That's a really provocative thought.
Maybe their appeal is just that they're, it's their simple lives, their unexpected courage that defines them, more than some grand lineage going back to the dawn of time. Definitely something to mull over.